Hello everybody, this is Della from The Beauty of Play, and today I'm showing how I'm doing our chalkboard drawing for a Shakespeare unit. So I'm using an image from the book that we're using for our spine, which is Shakespeare, His Works, and His World by Michael Rosen. So I began the chalkboard drawing by blocking in the colors for the large aspects of the picture that I'm doing. It really helps me to use a picture and not a photograph because I can use another artist's abilities to determine shadow and highlights, and that's really helpful for me. So here I'm blocking in the stage with the yellow. And I'm going to take that same yellow and block in the sky above the center of the globe, which is open. Next, I'm going to take the yellow and I'm using it to block in the balcony. These are the railings for the balcony. And then I'm going to use that same yellow and block in the columns that support those balconies. And I'm going in, adding a little bit of detail to those balcony railings. If you notice that it's larger on the left, and as I go across the right, it gets slightly smaller. And then I'm going to take my orange, it's a light orange color, and block in the background for the balcony. And I use that same orange color to put a little shadow on the railings of the balcony. This double layer of color adds depth to the picture. And then I'm looking at the roof and the columns. There is a beam that runs along the top of the page, and then in the middle where the other two columns are. So I'm blocking that color in for the beams, and then I'm going back and adding shadow to the columns and also highlights to the columns. And I'm adding a little detail. The lines at the bottom of the column are slightly curved to give that dimensional look. And then I'm going through and adding highlights and shadows to those that give it a little bit more depth. Now work on adding different layers of colors for these beams to give it depth. And then I'm going to go back and put some highlights and shadows on these beams. Now I'm going to fill in the texture of the roof. So I'm making these cross hatches, and I'm going in with a slightly darker color of brown and coloring in each of the squares. Then I'm going to take my black, and in each of the square I'm going to place a reverse L shape in the bottom left-hand corner, and that is giving it shadow and giving it some depth. Now these columns are pretty intricate, and so I'm adding these support that go out from the column to the beams. And then I'm going back to add a little bit more detail with shadows and highlights. I'm taking my yellow again and going back over the balcony railings, giving the tops and the bottoms to the railing. And then I'm going to go over with a darker brown and add shadows on the right side of those beams that are holding the balcony up. Then I'm going in and putting the bottoms, a little shadow on the bottoms of the balconies. Putting a shadow on the stage from the column. And adding the curve of the roof over the balconies. This is a thatched roof, and so I'm attempting here to add a little texture so that you can see the roof come over the edge of the beams. So there was some detail at the bottom of the balcony in the picture, and I'm attempting to put that detail in at the bottom of the balconies, but it turns out not to really stand out that much and be that obvious. And here I'm adding the side of the stage in brick. I block out the color with an orange brown, and then I take a dark brown and draw lines that curve around that surface in almost parallel lines. And I'm just giving a hint of the bricks that lay there. When I go back in with the yellow. I'm just adding tick marks that alternate just here and there. I'm not doing the entire thing. And then I'm going to go back with a couple more colors. And then I'm going to go back with a dark brown and black and add shadows. And I'm going to go ahead and take that black and add more shadows throughout the rest of the picture. On the columns and the beams that hold the balcony. going at the top of the columns, adding little circles to depict the swirls in the column, and then going back with the dark brown and adding shadows to give them some depth. Adding more shadows to the balconies. And here I'm going in and adding the texture on the inside of the balcony walls. I'm just doing cross hatches, large cross hatches in each of them, and then I'm going to go back and put some shadows in there. So throughout the picture, every once in a while you'll see me move out of the picture. I am stepping back to take a look at the picture as a whole and seeing what else I need to do to the picture. So here I start to fill in little ovals to suggest people in the balconies. I use two colors for this. They're very close. One a lighter yellow and then a darker brown yellow. I don't spend very much time on the detail of these faces. Going in and highlighting the stage. And now I'm going to start adding the viewers closer to the stage. So I start with making an oval and then adding some texture for hair. And then blocking in the shoulders. These people closest have a little more detail. I spend a little more time on them than the ones farther away. But there's still not a lot of detail. Just some highlights and shadows in their clothing and in their hair. And then eventually I go back and highlight some of their faces. Now I'm going in and adding a little of texture in the area where the vast majority of the people are going to be on the ground. So I'm using about 3 different colors here. no real rhyme or reason, just in different places so that I have some texture to, to begin with. And then I'm going to go in and start adding people. The people closest in the picture will be larger, and those farther away should be smaller. Again, I'm using two colors that are close together. One is a light yellow and the other is a darker brown yellow. I do go in and block the shoulders on a few. It gives the illusion that they're standing close together. And then I go through with a peachy color and I highlight some of their faces. And this is the most challenging part for me. There are 3 figures on the stage, and I'm blocking in the figures. I start with the first vest, and then I move out to his shirt and his boots. And then I put a slight diagonal dash there so that I know where his sword will go. And I go back in with a different color and I fill in his pants and the rest of his shirt. I'm attempting to add shadows in the clothing. And then I'm going to block in his head and work on adding hair and shadows. And then I go back in and I draw his cape behind him. It's just two tiny little curves at the top where it attaches to its shoulder. And then I go in with some highlights and some shadows to try to add depth to the fabric. Then I go in blocking in the second figure, starting with their shoulders. This looks to be a cardinal from the picture. Then drawing the robes with a light yellow. I eventually realized that this is too short and go back and lengthen his robe. Using a color slightly darker than the yellow I used for the robes to add some shadow. And then taking another piece of chalk that's slightly darker than the one that I previously used for shadow and trying to add more depth. Then I block in his head with an oval and use the same red that I used for his cape, for his hat, and then a little highlight on top of that. The last figure is a woman, and I block in the black of her dress and the sleeves of her arms, and then I go back in and block in her shoulders and her neck, and use an oval for her head, and I use that same black for the cap on her head. And then I take a white, highlight the top of her dress, and then the top of her hat. Moving out of the picture again to stand back and look at to see what I need. And then I realized from doing that the cardinal's robes are both too wide and too short. So I'm going in and lengthening them here and adding a bit of shadow. Moving out of the picture again so that I can step back and look at it as a whole. And then coming back and realizing that I've wanted a little more highlights on their facial features and highlights throughout the audience. Really not happy with this robe here. Really trying to show the folds and the movement of the fabric and envying the artists of the Renaissance. So here I've decided that I'm happy with the picture so far, and I'm going to write the words. I'm trying to mimic the font used in the book. So first I write out the letters and then I go back and add the little triangles at the bottom of some of the letters. When I have all of the letters written, I go back with a lighter color and add highlights to each of the letters. And I step back to look at the drawing one more time and realize that the word stage is completely crooked. And I erase it and then draw the word again. And that concludes the chalk drawing for our Shakespeare unit.